The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. Of course, you know by now this voice is not that of David Pakman. I'm Benjamin Dixon filling in for David, who is away for today. He will be back tomorrow. Let's jump right into the news. Brett Kavanaugh, well, according to his college friends, he's a liar. Several friends have come out to state that Kavanaugh's testimony before the Senate was untruthful, and some have outright said that he has lied. This comes on the heels of a New York Times report that says that as an undergraduate student at Yale, Kavanaugh got into a bar fight or instigated a bar fight. I want to start there. Let's read the quote from the New York Times, and this is what they had to say. They said, quote, "As an undergraduate student at Yale, Brett Kavanaugh was involved in an altercation at a local bar during which he was accused of throwing ice on another patron, according to a police report. The incident, which occurred in September 1985 during Mr. Kavanaugh's junior year, resulted in Mr. Kavanaugh and 4 other men being questioned by the New Haven Police Department. Mr. Kavanaugh was not arrested, but the police report stated that a 21-year-old man accused Mr. Kavanaugh of throwing ice on him for some unknown reason." The fact that he may have been, that he was drinking, right, I think everyone pretty much can conclude that that's not a big deal. Drinking is not a big deal whatsoever. The fact that he may have had a problem with alcohol in and of itself is not a disqualifying trait. We don't vilify somebody just because they have a problem with alcoholism. But as his friend said on, he made one of his college friends made a statement yesterday that I think was appropriate. Now, the clip that I have doesn't include this portion, but as he begins to say his experience with Brett Kavanaugh, he said something that was very profound. He says that someone's mistakes at 18 to 21 should not disqualify them for the rest of their life. He said, but however, as a 53-year-old federal judge, the fact that he's lying now should disqualify him, and he should face the ramifications. Take a listen to one of Brett's college friends saying that Brett is a liar.
"I have direct, repeated knowledge about Brett's drinking and his disposition while drunk. And I do believe that Brett's actions as a 53-year-old federal judge matter. If he lied about his past actions on national television, and more especially while speaking under oath in front of the United States Senate, I believe those lies should have consequences. It is truth that is at stake, and I believe that the ability to speak the truth, even when it does not reflect well upon oneself, is a paramount quality we seek in our nation's most powerful judges. I can unequivocally say that in denying the possibility that he ever blacked out from drinking, and in downplaying the degree and frequency of his drinking, Brett has not told the truth."
So he has repeated knowledge. I mean, the last sentence is the most profound. He said, Brett has not told you the truth. That's one thing. But according to this, Brett has perjured. Kavanaugh has perjured himself before the Senate in a sworn testimony before the Senate. Now, the whole picture of Brett Kavanaugh is starting to reveal itself to us. It's revealing itself to us, and we can see that the person who had the meltdown in the testimony last week is exactly the person that all of his college friends are describing. He is the person who would start a bar fight by losing his temper, losing his cool, and throwing ice on somebody who says that for some unknown reason, he didn't know why Brett did it, but just for some unknown reason. This is the type of person that the Republicans are trying to put on the Supreme Court. But it gets worse. Here's another clip from two other college friends from Brett Kavanaugh's past. This time they were on The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, and this is what they had to say.
I was appalled. He was clearly lying, and it was incredibly disturbing to see somebody perjuring themselves who's in line to be a Supreme Court justice.
And Lynn Brooks, your reaction to what you heard? I agree. The reason that I decided to speak out was when he gave the Fox News interview, and as I said in the Washington Post, tried to paint himself as a choir boy, where all he did was study and play sports, and every once in a while he would have a beer, and that's simply not consistent with the Brett Kavanaugh that I knew in college.
And that was Liz Swisher and Lynn Brooks. Lynn Brooks actually gave a statement to the FBI about her experiences with Brett Kavanaugh, and she stands by that statement still today. Here's one more piece of evidence from Brett's past, from a college friend, that is extremely damning. There's a tweet on Twitter by Jamie Roche, who was Brett Kavanaugh's college roommate, and this is what Jamie had to say. He said, quote, "As Brett Kavanaugh's college freshman roommate, I was never contacted by the FBI for any of their background checks. I assume college behavior was not a topic of interest. They did not find Debbie's story because they were not looking for it." Who is Debbie, you might ask? Debbie is actually Deborah Ramirez, and she is the woman, the 53-year-old woman, former college roommate, or I'm sorry, not roommate, but college classmate with Brett Kavanaugh, who, according to a story in the New Yorker by Ronan Farrow, let me read the quote from Ronan Farrow and Jane Mayer. This is what they said about Ramirez. They said, quote, "Ramirez said that she felt confident enough in her recollections to say that she remembers Kavanaugh had exposed himself at a drunken dormitory party, thrust his penis in her face, and caused her to touch it without her consent as she pushed him away. Ramirez is now calling for the FBI to investigate Kavanaugh's role in the incident. I would think an FBI investigation would be warranted." Now, this is a problem for Brett, and this is a problem for Brett because Republicans, as a handful of Republicans, really just one, Jeff Flake, has called for this investigation. And in the midst of the calling of this investigation, you would remember from David's clip yesterday, he was discussing how this investigation is a farce. And it is a farce in so much as the White House attempted to limit the scope of this investigation to a very narrow focus, a very myopic focus that could have helped Brett to still get away with it. But now we have a bigger problem because Jeff Flake, along with, I believe, one other Republican, has pressured the White House to open up the scope of the investigation, and the White House has acquiesced. And now the FBI has the liberty to investigate all facets of these claims, including that of Debbie Ramirez, including that of Dr. Ford that we heard from on last week. And so now we're getting ready to get a deep dive into the real personality of Brett Kavanaugh. Here's why this is his real personality. It's not that you can't change from who you were in college, which into becoming a better person, which is very difficult to do, but it's possible. It's not that we should hold individuals to who they were at 16, 17, and 18, even though society still does that, particularly with minorities. I mean, our entire lives are ended at the age of 17 because of decisions that we made. Matter of fact, before I even finish my sentence, if you or I had carried ourselves like Brett Kavanaugh in college, and you are either a minority or you come from the working class and you did not have the privilege of having money to guide you through life, we would have been arrested. None of us would be up for consideration for anything if we carried ourselves in the manner in which all of Brett's college roommates say he carried himself. And it's not because you should not get an opportunity to grow into something more. It's that it's very rare that you have people given that opportunity unless you are a wealthy, particularly white individual, and specifically a man. I mean, there's an entire echelon of society that has lived without ramifications their entire lives. They are above the law. They don't have to worry about these laws. I mean, there's another story coming up where a man who was facing 11 years in jail for 44 pounds of marijuana is only getting probation. You know, so there are people with connections. Either you're wealthy in terms of just raw money or you're wealthy in terms of connections. They have been able to get away with stuff throughout American history. And so the problem isn't that somebody who's young and makes a mistake and has had an opportunity to grow out of it. The problem is really that we're seeing a guy who's never been held accountable for anything. And you could tell that by his demeanor and his lack of not even just decorum, but he could not comport himself in a dignified manner, he not even in a decent manner in that investigation or in the hearing last week. He really had a meltdown, a genuine, bona fide meltdown, and he looked like a person who has never been held accountable in his life. And because of that, it's not his mistakes when he was 19, it's his mistakes at 53 that show us he has not grown a bit since he was 19. You know, there is something special about Donald Trump. And this next clip that I'm going to play demonstrates, and I'm obviously saying special tongue in cheek, but take a look at this clip where Cecilia Vega began to ask Donald Trump a question, and he insulted her in the very Trumpian fashion.
She's shocked that I picked her. No. She's like in a state of shock.
I'm not thinking, Mr.
That's
President.
okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
In a tweet this weekend, Mr. President, you said that it's incorrect to say you're limiting the scope of the FBI investigation.
What does that have to do with trade? I don't mind answering the question, but, you know, I'd like to do the trade.
It has to do with the other
right.
headline in the news, which is the Kavanaugh nomination.
I know, but how about talking about trade, and then we'll get to that.
Okay. Here. I'm sorry for laughing. But Donald Trump is such... I can't say it on David's program because I know we go over the radio airwaves, but Donald Trump is an extreme a-hole. He is a jerk to the point of absurdity. I mean, it's the moment is a horrible moment for America, to be sure. It is disgraceful for the president of the United States to behave in this manner, right? To insult this woman for no reason whatsoever. None whatsoever. It does show, I really do have to list all the things wrong with this before I go into what I was going to say. But it really shows his disdain for women. It shows he has absolutely no respect for women, which is the same thing, but I just have to reiterate. It really shows that Donald Trump views women through the lens of condescension. And this is reflected through his life, particularly with the accusations against him. I mean, it makes total sense that he would want somebody like Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court because that is the same type of personality that he has. And so this is a really disgusting moment for the president of the United States, for this country. But also nestled in that is the fact that Donald Trump is a coward. Mind you, I still have something else to say about this at the end, but I have to point this out as well. Donald Trump is a coward. Did you see the fierceness in Cecilia Vega's voice, tone, demeanor, and in her eyes when she said, "Excuse me"? I was like, it's about to go down. Like, if you've ever stepped over the line with a woman in general, because what I've learned about women, which is absolutely amazing and great, is that they really are not going to bite their tongues. And whereas men, you know, most of the time we back down, just like Donald Trump backed down. Look at how he backed down. I mean, he says this insulting, condescending statement to this woman, and as soon as she checked him, she didn't even get into it. All she had to say was, "Excuse me," and he backed down like the coward that he is. I mean, this is the quintessential example of a chauvinist, we'll leave it there, of a chauvinist pig who tries to insult a woman, quickly realizing that he cannot go toe to toe with this individual. So shout out to Cecilia Vega for that was a read. She read him for filth. I'm sorry, that's an African-American colloquial that basically means that she told him off without even having to really try. And it was a beautiful moment for her in terms of her showing Donald Trump, showing the world that Donald Trump is a bunch of loud. He's not even a bark, right? You know, all bark and no bite. He's just a loud mouth, foul mouth, individual with no respect for anyone else, but at the core of him, he's a coward. Now, what I wanted to say at the beginning, but I had to really outline all the things that was wrong with this, is that Donald Trump is he's a clown. He's a jerk. He's a joke. And you know what? For people who like jerks, and in your own head, I want you to substitute jerk for another word because we're on radio. But for people who like that, they probably think that this was the funniest thing that they ever saw yesterday, and they are applauding him. Now, part of me, I am a jerk. I'm personally, I too suffer from a-holery. And so I laughed at this segment, and then I had to pause and think about it and see everything that was wrong with it. So thankfully, I have the ability to transcend my jerkitude. I'm an idiot, and amongst other things. But the point is that there's an entire group of people out there who will see this as a pro. They will see this as something redeeming in Donald Trump. They love this about Donald Trump.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I'm Benjamin Dixon. David Pakman is away. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders doesn't have a middle name. So in the primaries, I gave him a middle initial of F. Bernie effing Sanders has pushed and pressured Amazon so much that this morning, Amazon has announced that they are raising the minimum wage for all of their U.S. workers, all of their employees, some 250,000 individuals, to $15 an hour. Now, we should just take a minute to applaud the efforts of Bernie Sanders and everyone in the progressive movement who have insisted that this is the bare minimum that people need to live in America. I mean, I think it still only adds up to about $28,000 a year for a full-time employee. So, I mean, take it from me, or hell, take it for you. That's not enough. That's not a lot of money. But for a person who works full-time, for a person who gives 40 hours a week, I mean, that's the least that we should be doing for if you're making trillions of dollars. But let's get to the specifics. And this is from CNBC. This is what they said, quote, Amazon announced Tuesday it's raising the minimum wage for all U.S. employees to $15 effective next month. The new minimum wage will benefit more than 250,000 Amazon employees, including part-time and temporary employees, as well as another 100,000 seasonal employees. The company said some employees who already make $15 per hour will also see a pay increase, according to CNBC. Now, to let you know why, I mean, hopefully most of you already know about Bernie Sanders' activism with regard to Amazon and targeting them like a laser, which he absolutely was right in doing. But I want to read a tweet from Bernie Sanders, a recent tweet, and then as well as read about a piece of legislation that he introduced. Bernie Sanders said this on Twitter. He said, quote, Amazon is worth $1 trillion. Jeff Bezos is worth $155 billion. Thousands of Amazon workers have to rely on food stamps, Medicaid, and public housing to survive. That is what a rigged economy looks like. Tomorrow, we will introduce a bill to end subsidies for low-wage employers. Now, to give you a little background on that legislation that he introduced, it was called the Stop Bezos Bill. Named the Stop Bad Employers by Zeroing Out Subsidies, or the Stop Bezos Act, after Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, Sanders' bill would levy a tax on large companies equal to the value of the public benefits that their workers receive. He argues that if employers paid a living wage, taxpayers would save $150 billion a year on the government assistance programs, including food stamps, Medicaid, and public housing. Now, I want you to pause and think about this. It's not just Amazon. Companies like Walmart and McDonald's, they pay their employees so little that they have to get on food stamps and public assistance and Medicaid in order to survive. So we are literally subsidizing sharecropping. We're subsidizing slave labor in this country, where an individual gives 40 hours a week and they are doing exactly what this capitalistic society is demanding of them, and yet they're not given enough to survive when CEOs of these companies make more in 1 second than some of them make in a year. Now, that might be hyperbole, but I'm sure I'm not that far off if you do the math. It may take a minute. It may take a minute for Jeff Bezos to make as much money as the individual makes in an entire year that makes his company work. And this shows you that there's an entire breed of capitalists as well as politicians. But there's an entire group of individuals who want no responsibility to the society. They simply want to withdraw all of the benefits and all of the wealth that they can get out of the society without ever paying anything back. They don't want to pay back into our infrastructure. They don't want to pay back into any social programs for the social good, for the common welfare. They don't want to invest in anything. They will gladly invest in, they want the government to invest in the military, because investing in the military means investing in defense contractors, which is just another capitalistic venture. But they don't want any responsibility to the government, to the society rather, from which they derive all of their wealth. They want to be able to take everything and give nothing back to us. And what they would pay back into the society would be in the form of taxation. And so now we see we're getting, I mean, what stage of capitalism is this? When you have all sorts of people, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people. If you take Walmart and McDonald's, you're talking probably close to 1 million workers who have to get on government assistance because their corporate lords don't pay them enough to even live on the feudal land that they're tilling. This is the kind of society that we are quickly going to, and even $15 an hour is not enough. But since they did capitulate. They acquiesced a little bit. Good on you, Amazon. But now, obviously, we're going to demand more. We're going to demand more from Walmart. We're going to demand more from all of these companies that make trillions of dollars now off of slave wages in this country. And thanks to Bernie Sanders for leading the charge on this. I mean, seriously, a lot of people try to slam Bernie Sanders for this specifically, but his actions have led to a direct material benefit for 250,000 individuals in this country. Nobody else was doing this. Nobody else in the Senate, nobody else he had supporters, right? I know Nina Turner was side by side. There's people, all types of activists who have been calling for the same thing. So Bernie Sanders is not alone in this, but he led the charge. And while he was leading the charge, you had obviously Republicans attacking him, but you also had Democrats attacking him, and people even using this as a means of explaining why it was so good that he lost the primaries. But what have you done? Everybody who slammed Bernie Sanders, what have you done to have a measurable, positive, material impact for the good of 250,000 people? And now we're getting ready to go for more. Miss me with all that. Bernie Sanders would have won. Speaking of elections and who would have won, Republicans are fixated on winning by any means necessary. Quick anecdote, 2004, I was living in Florida and I was purged from the rolls. I was not able to vote. So I decided personally what I was going to do was I was going to make them regret ever purging me from the polls, because obviously I was a legitimate voter who had registered to vote, but I digress. So I mobilized about 150 people to go vote for me. Yeah, I let them know that I had been purged and I wanted them to vote for me. I don't know how many of them would have voted anyway. Maybe like 10% would not have, but still, the point is, I was able to make that impact. But that's just one anecdote that's probably absolutely not the norm. It is the exception. And what's going on with Republicans now, it's the same thing that's been going on for years. They are focusing like a laser on some specific races, including Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, and they are purging those voters at high rates. This is according to a report from the Brennan Center. You can find it on BrennanCenter.org. The report is from Kevin Morris and Myrna Perez. It just came out on yesterday, and I want to read a couple of quotes from it so that you can understand what's going on. Quote, earlier this summer, when the Brennan Center released a report examining voter purge data through 2016, we found that 4 million more people were purged from the rolls between the federal elections of 2014 and 2016 than between 2006 and 2008. Much of that increase came from states where previously required under the Voting Rights Act to get election changes cleared in advance before that part of the law was eviscerated by the Supreme Court in 2013. Now, let's pause here. There's a lot more to read, but I want to make a point here. The courts absolutely matter because the courts have the ability to be a final decision in so many critical issues, including the Voting Rights Act in, I believe, Shelby County versus Holder, if my memory serves me correctly, was the case that allowed states who previously, because of their history of segregation and discrimination and voter disenfranchisement of minorities, they were required to check with the Justice Department in order to make any changes. As soon as that was eviscerated in 2013, the phrase from BrennanCenter.org, we saw state after state after state that one time had to get approval begin to act in very nefarious activities with regard to disenfranchising communities of color and marginalized communities in general, because they know that these communities generally vote with the Democratic Party. Instead of saying, let me make an appeal to these communities, they say, we don't want to change who we are, the Republican Party saying this. We're not going to change. There's nothing wrong with us. Our bigotry is fine. Our homophobia is fine. Our xenophobia is fine. And those people, they don't really have any legitimate qualm. They don't have anything wrong. They don't have any legitimate excuse to not support us. So what we're going to do, instead of changing our bigoted policies, we're just going to make it impossible for them to vote. And this is exactly what's being done in 3 key states. These are important races that are coming up. Every race is important, but all of this leading up to this critical juncture where you could elect a progressive candidate in Florida, Andrew Gillum, in Georgia, as well as in Florida, the first black governors, potential for the first African-American governors. I mean, we're in 2018 and we're still getting the first, which is obscene. But here we are, Stacey Abrams in Georgia. And then, of course, in North Carolina, they've been facing critical gerrymandering questions for many years. But here we are, and Republicans have shown that they are willing to take away your vote, literally take away your vote. Let's hone in on Florida. I want to read the quote from the Brennan Center, what they said with regard to Florida. And this is what they said, quote, from November 2008 to November 2010, the median purge rate in the Sunshine State was 0.2%. I want to repeat, 0.2%. That number jumped to 3.6% from 2012 to 2014. And new data show it's jumped again between December 2016 and September 2018. Florida has purged more than 7% of its voters. And I want to pause there because I want you to understand what's going on. They are purging voters. They are disenfranchising voters at an increasing rate, right? They're not slowing down. They're not doing it at the same pace. They are increasing the rate at which they are purging voters, which means they are frantically trying to stop entire communities from voting. This is serious. I mean, they are out there doing it with intention, with purpose, and they're doing it quickly, and they're doing it at a frantically increasing rate. But let's continue with the Brennan Center article. Not only can we tell that the purges have increased, we also know where the biggest purges are happening. Harris, Hendry, Palm Beach and Okaloosa counties have each been purged more than 10% of their votes in the last 2 years. Dade and Broward counties also have a high number of zip codes that purge at a higher rate. Some of those zip codes, however, include military bases or college campuses, which one would expect to have higher purge rates because of the transient nature of the population and because of the processes for removing voters who have moved. To voters living in these 3 states and to voters around the country, check your registration status to make sure that you're still on the rolls. If you're not registered and think you should be, call your local election officials to find out why. There's still time to register in many states if you have a problem. I wanted to read that last paragraph because it is a call to action that I think everyone needs to take extremely seriously. You need to check to see if you have been purged. That was my mistake in 2004. I did not check until it was too late to vote. I mean, to vote, to register and to vote, obviously. And so I was stuck trying to recruit other people to actually vote for me. And if you want to avoid that problem, and you're in these, hell, if you're in anywhere in this country, you need to check to see if you have been purged for any reason. You have, I know here in Georgia, you have until October, I believe it's mid-October that you have to register to vote. So check on your registration, make sure that you have not been purged. And then if you have been purged, register to vote again, just go through the process and then lend your voice to this conversation. Lend your experiences to this conversation. Let people know that you were purged. And in this, particularly in states like Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, where the critical races are coming up and these states are run by Republicans, the narrative really is simply this. Republicans are trying to stop as many people as possible from voting for Democrats, and they will do anything to win the next election.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. Of course, I'm not David. I'm Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. You can check out my podcast anywhere you get podcasts, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel where I post occasional videos about politics, and where you will not get conspiracy theories. I am allergic to conspiracy theories, and that means something today because on yesterday, a conservative-leaning outlet, the Washington Times, published a retraction in addition to an apology for the conspiracy theory that they spread about Seth Rich. And this is critical because Seth Rich has been one of the stories that has beleaguered the entirety of the 2016 election and the relitigation of the 2016 election. It's something that has been pushed by the hard right, by, the most deplorable of the deplorables. As well as some in progressive circles. To be honest with you, there are a lot of people who push this conspiracy theory, and it has become so entrenched in our discourse, so believed because of reputable outlets, particularly progressive outlets that peddle this conspiracy theory, that it has become a statement of absolute faith that Seth Rich was assassinated by the DNC with some connection to Hillary Clinton. Now, that language came from the right. It also came from an assertion made by WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, which we'll play that clip just to remind you. But it's one that has permeated, has been instilled in almost like indoctrination in progressive circles. Some of the more uninformed portions of progressivism. But let me get to the story. Here's a quote from, actually, the article was short, so I'm going to read the entire article because they give you specifics, and the specifics really matter here. And so this is the retraction from the Washington Times. They said, quote, "The Washington Times published an op-ed column titled 'More Cover-Up Questions. The Curious Murder of Seth Rich poses questions that just won't stay under the official rug,' by Adam James Lyons, who's retired, the column on March 1st online and on March 2nd in its paper editions. The column included statements about Aaron Rich, the brother of former Democratic National Committee staffer Seth Rich, that we now know to be false. One such statement was that, interesting, and this is a quote from their original article. They said, quote, "Interestingly, it is well known in the intelligence circles that Seth Rich and his brother Aaron Rich downloaded the DNC emails and was paid by WikiLeaks for that information. The Washington Times now does not have any basis." Watch this. Does not have any basis to believe any part of that statement to be true, and the Washington Times retracts it in its entirety. Pause. Let's talk about this. This sentence right here. The Washington Times now does not have any basis to believe any part of that statement to be true. What happened now as opposed to when you published it? Right? What part of your sources, like, you know, either it was not true then, or you have found that one of your quote unquote sources was absolutely lying to you, which I think an outlet like this, maybe they would not have outed the source, but they would have weaseled their way out of this by saying that according to one of our sources, we trusted and we don't trust that source anymore. And so, you know, that type of thing, they aren't doing this. The Washington Times is basically a rag, and in many ways, it's a reasonable conclusion that they didn't have any evidence then. They didn't have any evidence then to support this, or they just did extremely sloppy journalism, if you even want to call it journalism, or it's both. But let's continue reading there. At least they've retracted, and let's continue reading. The column also stated, quote, "Also, why hasn't Aaron Rich been interviewed by law enforcement, and where is he? The Washington Times understands that law enforcement officials have interviewed Mr. Rich and that he has cooperated with their investigation. The Washington Times did not intend to imply that Mr. Rich has obstructed justice in any way, and the Washington Times retracts and disavows any such implication." I mean, honestly, you could not have picked, see, if you're going to try to do investigative journalism, do it, and do it right. Because this tells me that you didn't even really try. If you could not find, you found out now, probably through some type of lawsuit, but you didn't do your due diligence and you made an accusation based on what? Which is probably why it led to a lawsuit, which this article really smells as though it's a part of a lawsuit. That's just conjecture. But, you know, I think it's a pretty safe conclusion at this point. Last but not least, the last paragraph, the Washington Times apologizes to Mr. Rich and his family. All online copies of the column have been deleted, and all online content referencing the column has been deleted to the extent within the Washington Times' control. The Seth Rich, again, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, the Seth Rich controversy, conspiracy theory, to be sure, has been one of the most disgusting after effects of the lingering effects of the 2016 election, because it keeps coming back. I want you to Google a couple of things. Go to YouTube, actually, and just Google Seth Rich and look at, you know, if you enjoy making yourself angry, so probably shouldn't do this, but just if you're curious, go to a comment section about Seth Rich and look at the derangement that is going on. And then keep reading, and you realize that this derangement isn't just coming from Republicans. This derangement is coming from a lot of people in progressive circles. And you don't have to take my word for it, because they're written in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments with thousands and 500, the thousands of likes, 500 likes, 200 likes, all, in every there. It's there to show you that this conspiracy theory that was driven by so many people on the right was also driven by some voices on the left, and it has become a pervasive problem that even with this retraction, this is the biggest point, even with this retraction from a conservative media outlet, you're still going to have, of course, some deplorables believe it, but the saddest thing is that you're going to still have progressives who believe this. I want to play this clip, and we'll end with this. This is Julian Assange. I have a lot to say about Julian Assange, but not in this segment. So I'm stammering because I want to say some things, but I won't. But just take a look at this. This is from, I believe it's around 2015 and 2016. And this is what he had to say, insinuating that Seth Rich was his whistleblower and that he paid the ultimate price.
Whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material and often very significant risks. As a 27-year-old works for the DNC, who was shot in the back, murdered just 2 weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington. So
that was just a robbery, I believe, wasn't it?
No, there's no finding. So
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that our sources take risks, and they become concerned to see things occurring like that.
But was he one of your sources then? I mean,
we don't comment on who our sources are.
But why make the suggestion?
And here's the problem. Julian Assange lent his entire credibility to fueling this conspiracy theory. And because so many people on the left respected and trusted Julian Assange, they held on to this and they never let it go. And matter of fact, now they still won't let it go because it has become a part of the way of thinking of a certain segment of the left, as well as an entire swath of the deplorable right. File this next story underneath the criminal injustice system, America's criminal injustice system. The son of a police officer gets no time for 44 pounds of weed. Now, to be sure, I want to state this up front, that I am very much pro legalization of marijuana, even recreational use. I firmly believe, and it's not even a statement of belief, it's just a fact that what we allow in terms of alcohol and the amount of damage and carnage and what, destruction of your body, and not to mention, lives that have been taken because of alcohol compared to marijuana, you can't compare the two. And as well as the number of people who are sitting in jail right now who are still getting prosecuted and still getting sentences, jail time, for both marijuana possession as well as marijuana sales. And last but not least, when they attempted to smear Botham Jean, the 27-year-old from Texas who was killed by the white woman police officer who claims that she thought he was in her apartment, but she was at the wrong apartment. You remember that story? When they tried to smear his name, what did they say? Oh, he had marijuana in his apartment, traces of marijuana in his apartment. There has been such a long history of marijuana being used to vilify people of color, specifically black people. And so many people, black people specifically, who are sitting in jail because of the war on drugs, that the full decriminalization and full legalization, even for recreational purposes, is only the right thing to do and for the benefit of every community, but specifically the black community. That being the case, it's not legal yet. And there's still black people and Hispanic people and even probably some white people who are still getting some jail time over marijuana. But not if you're the son of a former police officer. Thomas Betts, who's 39 years old. First of all, my dude, you're old. What the hell are you doing at 39 years old? You're either a kingpin and there's something else going. I mean, 44 pounds of marijuana suggests that you have a really healthy organization going on, right? Or you're Breaking Bad and you're going to do with the AMC way, right? You're trying to break in. What are you doing breaking in to the weed game at 39 years old? I mean, his partner, Michael Dorley, 41 years old. There's something more to the story, but let's set that aside. Thomas Betts is the son of a former Miami Valley crime lab director, Ken Betts. And this is what the article from the My Dayton Daily News said. They said, quote, Special Prosecutor John Marshall has asked the judge to honor the presumption of prison, which the judge said was not necessary because of the defendant's lack of any serious criminal record and there were no victims. They went on to say, quote, our job as prosecutors is to make sure that defendants are held accountable for breaking the law, said Butler County Assistant Prosecutor John Marshall, who was named as a special prosecutor to avoid the appearance of conflict of interest. Well, considering that Betts and Dorley could have faced more than a decade in prison, about 11 years in prison, and they got off with 5 years probation at the discretion of the judge, I don't think that you really demonstrated that you got rid of the conflict of interest. I'm just saying the conflict of interest doesn't just go with the prosecuting attorney's office. It also rests inside of the judge, the judge's chambers. And so here we are, a guy who got caught with 44 pounds of weed. Do you know how much weed that is? I mean, seriously. Like, I know guys who've lost their entire families. Like, I'm laughing for not crying because I know guys who've lost their entire families for having a pipe with one pack. It was packed one time with weed. Like come on. Smaller than a nickel bag. People have been killed over one joint. They said they smelled weed on Philando Castile. And so the police officer who killed him literally got off because the officer was scared for his life because he smelled marijuana. And here this guy, Thomas Betts, has 44 pounds of weed. I didn't even Google the street value of that. Someone Google that and put it in the comment section. Like, this guy is a drug dealer. He is a major drug dealer. And whereas I absolutely support us decriminalizing and legalizing the recreational use of marijuana, if you're still arresting black people over little small trace amounts of marijuana, and here the son of a police officer has gotten off for 44 pounds of weed, that demonstrates the problem in this country that has existed for years. I mean, forever. What's coming to mind right now, and I don't have the specifics, but it's coming back to my mind as we speak, was the campaign against marijuana in the early 1900s, where it insinuated that it made black people crazy, and it made white women fall in love with black people. And this kind of Jim Crow styled vilification of black people around marijuana use. And here we are today, having black people still be arrested, being killed by police officers, smeared because they had trace amounts of weed in their apartment that they were supposed to be in, both of them Jean, and a 39-year-old either drug lord or wannabe kingpin or wannabe Heisenberg gets off with probation for 44 pounds of weed. Now, they should take the weed and distribute it to everyone so we can all have a great afternoon. No problem with the weed. The problem is with the criminal justice system.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. Again, I'm obviously not David Pakman. David is away. He will be back tomorrow. Thanks for letting me fill in, David, and speak to your audience about all the news. And I want to start with the rhetorical question, if you would. How many times can Donald Trump lie to the American people and get away with it? We don't have an instance of him perjuring himself while he's under giving sworn testimony or testifying, before the Senate, which I know he would never do, or speaking to the FBI. But Republicans have made the case with Bill Clinton that lying to America is a very serious issue. And the Wall Street Journal has just released another report illustrating that Donald Trump has lied to America yet again. I want to read a little bit from the article. Quote, President Trump personally directed an effort in February to stop Stormy Daniels from publicly describing an alleged sexual encounter with Mr. Trump, people familiar with the event say. In a phone call, Mr. Trump instructed his then lawyer, Michael Cohen, to seek a restraining order against the former adult film actress whose real name is Stephanie Clifford through a confidential arbitration proceeding. One of the people said, Trump and Cohen had learned shortly before that Miss Clifford was considering giving a media interview about her alleged relationship with Mr. Trump, despite having signed an October 2016 non-disclosure agreement. This last paragraph is important. Mr. Trump told Mr. Cohen to coordinate the legal response with Eric Trump, one of the president's sons, and another outside lawyer who had represented Mr. Trump and the Trump organization in other matters, the people said. So we have multiple lies in here. The president of the United States says that he had no knowledge of these things that were going on, had no did not attempt to sway Stormy Daniels one way or the other. The specific lie here is that regarding to the Trump organization involvement with Stormy Daniels, Eric Trump is now running the organization for his father, and one of the attorneys involved represented the Trump organization. Now, the Wall Street Journal did report that the law firm for the attorney stated that he did this, or the attorney, I don't know if it's a woman or a man, did this on their own accord and not associated with the Trump organization. However, the ties are too close. And whether that makes a difference in terms of substantively, in terms of the narrative, in terms of exposing any new facts or any new truths. I mean, we all knew Donald Trump is a liar. That remains to be seen. How significant this story is in and of itself, that remains to be seen. But it's yet again another example of Donald Trump lying to America. And when Republicans have set the standard with the Kenneth Starr investigation back in the 90s, late 90s, they set the standard that one lie to America is enough for impeachment proceedings. You have to really ask yourself, when is enough enough? Well, I've asked myself the question, and I've answered the question for myself. Here's the thing, and I don't know if I've ever discussed this with David's audience, but I discuss this all the time with my audience. Pointing out the hypocrisy of Republicans is pointless. It absolutely is pointless because they thrive on hypocrisy. They absolutely will commence impeachment proceedings over Bill Clinton's lie, and we will be sitting with 200-300 lies. Actually, weren't we into the thousands? Well over 1,000 at least lies of Donald Trump, and will not even bat an eye. And if you want to point out the difference between lying under oath and lying in general, fine. And that's a fair observation. But the fact of the matter remains is that the Republican Party absolutely will hold Democrats and progressives to a standard that they will never hold to themselves to. They have no intention of holding themselves to that standard because it gives them a political advantage. It's called the asymmetrical political battle. And in this asymmetrical political war, the people who try to abide by decorum, people who try to abide by norms and institutions, the people who try to abide by the rules are always at a disadvantage to the people who are willing to blow this entire thing to hell. And the Republican Party has demonstrated that time and again, they are willing to break every rule. to destroy every institution, to renege on every regime, to do any, they will rewrite history. They will look at you in the face and call you a hypocrite, and then 2 seconds later be hypocritical themselves. They will do anything and everything for a single political win. Not the big win, but a single political win. And Democrats are still trying to hold themselves to some notions of decorum, of institutional norms and civility. And in this asymmetrical fight, the Democrats will always lose, which they have been for a very long time. I think we fooled ourselves with Obama's victory, thinking that we made real big strides. The fact of the matter is Obama's victory is a bit of an anomaly in terms of American history, obviously, but recent history, the era of Newt Gingrich. I was reading, I don't know who I was reading, I don't know which article I was reading, and possibly, no, I do know, the guy that wrote the book, and I can't think of his name, It's Time to Fight Dirty. I think I have the book back here. Anyway, he was on with David Pakman a few weeks ago, and he pointed out that the best place to trace this to would be Newt Gingrich. And so in this era of Newt Gingrich's scorched earth politics, where you lie to everyone's faces, but then you try to hold other people to the absolute most pedantic interpretation of the truth, right? That creates an asymmetrical fight that Democrats cannot win. So to my rhetorical question, how many times can Trump lie to America and get away with it? As many times as he wants to, so long as Republicans are in power. Thanks for hanging out with me today, folks. The bonus show is coming up. Thanks to David for having me. It's always a pleasure, and I will see you next time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.